Welcome back to the show. Is Omar Khadr, is he a radical terrorist? Is there a risk of him returning to terrorist attacks, or is this whole case in Guantanamo an example of not dealing with the horrible situation of child soldiers? Polls in Canada kind of split on it. Both sides quite passionate about whether or not he is a terrorist or a child soldier. The riveting testimony about the mental condition of Omar Khadr was given at Guantanamo by Dr. Michael Welner. He is Associate Professor of Psychiatry at NYU School of Medicine, and he is joining us now live. Welcome to the program, Dr. Welner.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's nice to have you. It is something that, as I said in the intro, has kind of split up Canada and really the world as we watch the first child soldier in Guantanamo Bay. First of all, can you tell me how much time did you get to talk to Omar Khadr?
I spoke to him for I interviewed him for about 8 hours, and actually our interview concluded with my making a decision at that point that other sources that were available to me at Guantanamo that I had the option to meet with, namely intelligence officials who had records and other aspects of observation who could inform my opinion, that they would actually inform me better at that point than Omar Khadr. But I drew what I could learn from in those 8 hours, and it naturally was not only helpful to me as the other 100-odd sources were, but it was important enough testimony against him that the defense did everything they could to keep that videotaped interview from ever being shown in court and even given to the prosecutors. The prosecutors never saw that interview. They never actually saw the interview that I did with Mr. Khadr. The only people who saw it were the defense team, the entire defense team, and myself.
All right, but you use the content of that.
Well, yes.
All right. Basically, you're quoted as saying he is al-Qaeda royalty and remains a radical jihadist who poses a grave risk of returning to terrorist attacks. Is that fair and true?
I think that he's absolutely al-Qaeda royalty in the eyes of the people around him down there. His father was a senior leader in al-Qaeda, and Omar Khadr entered custody by letting everybody around him know that, who wasn't already aware of that. So it was something that he presented as a calling card. And what I learned from intelligence officials down in Guantanamo is that there were only two prisoners down there who were treated with a certain kind of royalty deference. One was Khadr because of his connection not only with his father, but everybody knows that he's had contact with Osama bin Laden. And when you're in the al-Qaeda and radical Islamist circles, it's kind of like saying, I met the Queen. That is royalty. And also another prisoner whose father happens to be an extremely wealthy man and who's helping to finance the legal effort of a number of the other prisoners. So naturally, they give him a wide berth because he's very important to others whom he's funneling financial resources to. But those two individuals, they have a special status, and they're able to move with a bit of a halo and a bit of a protection around them because of who they are.
Wow, painting a real picture here. Dr. Welner, why do you think, what was it about his situation, about his beliefs, about the interview that makes you still think that he is highly dangerous?
Well, there are many factors, and we really would probably have to talk even an hour about this, but I'll try to boil it down at least in a more concise way. It would be enough as a psychiatrist to say that someone who has murdered is a risk for future dangerousness, but I don't even think, having gotten to know Khadr on a number of different levels, either directly or around him, that direct violence is something to expect from him. I believe that from the message of others around him and the people who influence him, he recognizes that he can have far greater successful impact in ratcheting up radical jihadist operations within North America if he just represents an inspiration and helps to lead. He's someone who learned the fundraising business within terror from his father. He was translating for him. There's an infrastructure already set up in Toronto of an organization that has ostensibly peaceful purposes, but intelligence officials and public source information have already implicated this organization in terror operations, not within Canada, but around the world.
And what organization is that?
You know what? I'm going to leave it to your readers to research it on their own. If they look up Ahmed Saeed Qadr and the organizations that he starts, they'll find it. And I'll tell you why. Because when you put yourself in the position that I have, and this is something your listeners need to appreciate, if I, as a psychiatrist, am going to come up with an opinion like this, I'm going to inspire a lot of antagonism from people who do not like criticism. And on some level, I might as well be a cartoonist.
Got it.
Okay? And so I do not want to be perceived as trying to pick a fight with anyone. Here's the bottom line. He's learned fundraising. He's learned the situation. He has a family that's committed to jihadism. They are waiting for him to lead them because others within the family have their own limitations. He's charming. He's smooth. He's multilingual. And most important, he has a number of propagandists, including in the news media, totally in his pocket. They believe that he was tortured. He was not. But they believe in the myth. They believe in him as a victim, which is something that he has worked quite successfully to his advantage.
How do you know that?
When you have these ingredients, and I'll answer your next question in a moment, but when you have these ingredients, it has certainly been my experience that media is the oxygen of terror. If people did not transmit Osama bin Laden's videotapes, nobody would care about him. His capacity to issue a videotape and have it go to Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and all of the media outlets that give him attention and give him legitimacy enables him to speak directly to an audience of far greater magnitude than were he to be ignored. Omar Qadr, in that regard, has people who show an unusual amount of interest in him. Now, for example, Michelle Shepard, who is a writer for the Toronto Star, a respected newspaper, has written a book called Guantanamo's Child. It has the appearance of a biography, but having read the book, because it was presented to me as a biography, it's a fiction. You know, it's like going to a movie and seeing adapted for television or adapted for the screen. It's a good story. It reads well. It's very sympathetic to Mr. Qadr. And if I read Gitmo's Child, I would probably be moved exactly the way Michelle Shepard would want me to be moved. But I can tell you, given my understanding of the case, it's a fiction. It doesn't make Omar Qadr a worse person. It just means that what people are reading that they believe to be biographical may not necessarily be true, and I have to make evidence-based determinations, and that's where my opinion comes from.
All right. And what evidence do you have that he is still ingrained in these kind of, you laid out circumstances that are really available to him to lead this forward. And a lot of Canadians are torn, and we're the ones who don't want him back and want him to stay in prison longer think this is a chance to get tough on these kind of situations. On the other hand, there are people who say this guy's a child soldier. What evidence do you have from your examination, Dr. Welner, that he is dangerous?
His closest influences are his family and those around him. And those around him are 100% radical jihadists. They're well-behaved. They're compliant.
Yeah.
But ideologically, that is where they're coming from. I believe that I testified that as recently as January of this year that one of his fellow detainees came to him saying, God willing, there will be good news from Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Now, would one of your friends come to you and make that kind of remark, anticipating that you would be receptive to it? Would you care to have a conversation like that? My point being that his closest connections and strongest influences are people who are very much invested in this ideology. I want to address something for you because you've mentioned this word twice already, and it didn't come up in testimony, but I think it's helpful for your audience to appreciate this. The phenomenon of child soldiers has been identified and described in Sierra Leone and other African populations. And in fact, one of the fictions that Omar Khadr has been successful in advancing, including the fiction that he was tortured, he was not. That is a hoax. Is this child soldier myth? Let me explain something. The African child soldiers are kidnapped. He was not. The African child soldiers are groomed into increasing levels of violence. Drugs are used to intoxicate them. In fact, there are times in which they're forced to commit atrocities, hacking people's arms off, shooting neighbors, in order that they cannot go back to their homes. This is not the case with Omar Khadr. Omar Khadr was training with weapons, and even in the book that I described, Gitmo's Child, he was described as driving around in a car, holding a gun, ready to use it, long before he was ever locked up by American forces.
I guess, though, the question is, and I just want to, is that free will or is that indoctrination by a family? I know that raises a lot of other questions about the bad people in our society, but I throw it to you here.
I think that's a very fair question, and I can appreciate that people deliberate how important is the indoctrination of his family. And I would submit to you that Abdurrahman grew up in the same family, and Abdurrahman did not fight in the jihad. I would submit to you that Omar Khadr was nowhere near his father when he went to the place where hostilities broke out. I would submit to you that there was 45 minutes of a lull with nothing happening. And what Lane Morris told me, one of the people that I interviewed, is he said there were 5 of us there simply asking people to just throw down their weapons and just come out the way everybody else would. He said they waited for us so that more Americans would come and they could kill more Americans.
All right.
This wasn't some spontaneous outburst. They waited and they targeted as many Americans as they could. And there was plenty of time to get out because, you know what? Other people in the same compound got out. Omar Khadr stayed, and he specifically said, we had a discussion about it, and I chose martyrdom.
All right.
I chose martyrdom. Child soldiers don't choose martyrdom. They're forced to conscript.
Dr. Welner, we're going to take a break. Can you please stay with us for another segment, please? All right?
Sure. Appreciate your interest.
All right.
We need time.
All right. We'll be back in a moment. Dr. Michael Welner is with us. He's the psychiatrist who testified in Guantanamo Bay, Omar Khadr case, and we're hearing it